Good morning, everyone. It's good to see everyone. And we've made it through this weather that's coming in. I'm coming from the south, so that wasn't as difficult, but praying that everything's okay north of us. We do have a couple of members that are delayed in coming in. Seems like the bridge is delayed with traffic. But we're going to go ahead and get started. So we want to have a really good full meeting and then dismiss as soon as we can due to the fact that this weather's coming. And it's already dropped from the time I left to here. It's felt like, whoa, wow, it's cold. So we want to drive safe at home. I would like to call this meeting to order of the Minimum Foundation Program Task Force. And we'll have roll call at the moment.
Mr. Bourne? Mr. Bourne is not present. Mr. Brockhouse? Mr. Brockhouse is not present. Mr. Bromley?
Here.
Mr. Bromley is present. Mr. Castile?
Here.
Mr. Castile is present. Mr. Claxton?
Here.
Mr. Claxton is present. Dr. Corville?
Here.
Dr. Corville is present. Mr. Davy? Mr. Davy is not present. Mr. Irwin?
Here.
Mr. Irwin is present. Senator Fields? Senator Fields is not present. Ms. Gleason? Ms. Gleason is not present. Representative Harris?
Here.
Representative Harris is present. Mr. Richard Hartley has a proxy. Ms. Madeline Karst? Here. Okay. Ms. Karst is present. Ms. Holloway?
Here.
Ms. Holloway is present. Ms. Ashley McReynolds has a proxy. Ms. Kelly Monroe, are you here?
Yes, here.
Ms. Monroe is present. Dr. Tia Mills? Present. Dr. Mills is present. Ms. Monica?
Present.
Ms. Monica is present. Ms. Polito?
Here.
Ms. Polito is present. Dr. Pope?
Here.
Dr. Pope is present. Ms. Posey?
Here.
Ms. Posey is present. Dr. Procopio?
Here.
Dr. Procopio is present. Ms. Romer? Ms. Romer is not present. Ms. Voce? Ms. Voce is not present. Dr. Baker? Dr. Baker is not present. Ms. Bujo? Ms. Bujo is not present. Ms. Sponger? Ms. Sponger is not present. Ms. Whitney? Ms. Whitney is not present. You do have a quorum.
Thank you. If you note your packet, I'm sorry, before I introduce anything in your packet, I do want to welcome Mr. Jay Norton from the Division of Administration with us, and he will be speaking with us about the budget overview. But in your packet, you do have a couple of forms on the 2021 MFP Task Force recommendation. This is for your preview to understand what took place last year. So, and Kevin here is holding it up. So if you take note, this is for your preview. We would not be going over this. And the other document, Ms. Bethesina will preview that with you. We're going to move on. Next item, please.
Consideration of a discussion regarding recommendations for the 2022-2023 Minimum Foundation Program Fund.
Motion, please.
Motion.
Ms. Polito, and second, Mr. Castillo. Consideration, is this Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. J. Dorn, if you start us off, please. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's good to be with you this morning. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you a little bit about the budget. We're obviously very encouraged where we are right now, given our forecast and given the incredible amount of one-time money that is flowing down from Washington that we have to spend. And just as an aside, but before I talk specifically about our budget proposal, there obviously may be some funding opportunities available, the best available to the department with a lot of this federal money. There's a lot to look at. We're trying to make an exhaustive look at everything to make sure we advise the right people to make sure that they get applications. And I know y'all are doing the same thing, so I just encourage you to be on the lookout for anything that may be appropriate from the federal grant programs that are out there. It's an unprecedented amount of federal money, and it's basically being sent to folks who apply for it and are awarded the grants grants, whereas most of the federal dollars that we see come from Washington are on a reimbursement basis. And these are dollars that are being sent without reimbursement, so just encourage you to do that. The budget forecast for the present year and for next year is extremely optimistic. The REC met earlier in January. We increased the forecast for the current budget year by over $700 million. We increased the forecast for next year by about $800 million. The REC will meet again typically in May. It would surprise me if we don't meet again in May, because usually when the House has got the bill in appropriations, before the bill comes out, there's an REC meeting, or right after the bill comes out and goes to the Senate, there's an REC meeting to identify additional monies that may be available. We have every expectation that there will be even more money recognized for next year's budget at the next REC meeting. The forecast that's been adopted by the REC, and I made the motion to adopt it, is the conservative forecast. We have two economists that give us recommendations on what they think the forecast ought to be, and the conference, 4 members have to unanimously agree on what it would be. And we took the lower forecast, and the lower forecast by admission of the economist was conservative. We wanted to be, as we always do, budget conservatively or estimate conservatively, but the other forecast that we did not accept was several hundred millions of dollars more. And we think probably that is a more realistic look at what's going to happen based upon what we've seen thus far in the economy and what we've seen particularly with sales tax and corporate income tax reports. So we're pretty optimistic about where we're going to be. The point being, there may be even more dollars available for the legislature to appropriate in next year's budget once there's a second REC meeting. But we have to budget based upon balancing the budget and what we say the estimate is going to be right now. So that's what the budget proposal that was submitted to the Joint Legislative Committee a couple of weeks ago includes. And as it relates to education, the minimum foundation program is fully funded based upon the way it is right now. We obviously want to do everything we can. The governor's made it pretty clear for K-12 education and for higher education. So if there's more money available, I think you can look for some additional recommendations that we will make to provide some further increases in the teacher pay raises that I'll discuss in just a second. The student count for 23 is projected right now to have a small increase over the current year. So we based the MFP forecast based upon that projected small increase. In discussions with the department, we realized that the student count for the current year is down. It's less than what was anticipated. So there was going to be extra money that would go back to the general fund if the minimum foundation, if the numbers didn't justify what had been appropriated in the budget. Normally that would go back to the general fund. It would be expended based on what the legislature chose to do on a general fund basis, potentially going to something other than education. We're recommending that the difference between the MFP forecast in the current year and what the projected student count is once we get February numbers stay in education. So we're recommending that amount of money, whatever it may be, and that number ranges, at least in our discussions with the department, maybe from 25 million to 50 million. That if that money would stay in education and would go into the early childhood program. That's one of the components of early childhood that we're recommending based upon the current year's dollars, and that would be realized in a supplemental appropriation bill. The budget forecast for next year includes a proposed pay raise for teachers, $1,500, support workers at $750. The governor has said publicly, and we certainly intend to follow through on this, that if that REC forecast in May comes in higher, the first dollars that we will recommend to the legislature would be to increase that teacher pay raise to $2,000 from $1,500. I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic that the dollars will be there to be able to do that, and you can look for that recommendation to be coming from the administration, but it will be just that, a recommendation to the legislature. They, of course, have the ultimate determination of how all these dollars are spent. So we have what we believe is a very good proposal to the legislature, particularly as it relates to funding for K-12 education, early childhood, and higher education. And those are going to be the priorities that we'll articulate to the legislature in support of the budget proposal and in support of increases in that budget if there is more money realized by the REC. The $25 million for early childhood is designed to fund the rate increases and the accessibility increases that DESE approved at a January 18th meeting. This is after a lot of consulting with Cade and with Beth, with Trey, who were very involved in our discussions about the budget, very involved in our discussions about what we could do for early childhood. And I think you'll see, and they will tell you that the recommendations we've made are consistent with what they've told us was the most advantageous way to invest in early childhood and to do so in a way that was going to improve the quality of education that was provided and making certain that those providers who were being paid rates were paid at a rate that would enable them to hire the kind of people with expertise that's needed to inject a true education component to what would otherwise be a child care setting. So we're very mindful of that, and these recommendations reflect that. The increase on the per child rate to the providers is funded at $25 million. There's an increase in LA4 rates on a per pupil basis of $17 million, an increase in the rate for non-public school early childhood development of $1.4 million. And just as an aside, we included this in our explanation of what we were doing for K-12 education. There's an additional funding for 256 students on the wait list for the Education Excellence Scholarship Program, which is, it totals $4.1 million. And then in addition to that, the money that I talked about, the $25 to $50 million that we may realize from the current year's MFP due to the lower student count, is being placed in the early childhood fund that has been seeded with a relatively small amount of money that, based on our discussions, is not sufficient to entice local school districts to want to participate. And we had a lot of discussion about this issue because in trying to understand and making sure the legislature understands that, yes, we're putting this money in a fund, but it's designed for the purpose of attracting matching dollars from local school districts. And as I understand it, there are several of the bigger school districts that already have some funding in place to accomplish this. A lot of the smaller districts do not have the wherewithal to be able to do this without some confidence that there's going to be matching dollars available from the state. And so this is that attempt to show the commitment that the state has to make this fund realistic, to encourage smaller districts to participate. We're also very cognizant of the fact that a number of the districts probably don't have the financial wherewithal to participate, and there's going to have to be some discussion about what can be done or should be done, if anything, regarding waivers on local matches or doing something to make certain that children in that targeted age group who happen to live in parishes that don't have finances aren't deprived of the opportunity to get the same benefits that those students who live in richer parishes have the opportunity to. That's a tougher challenge, and we'll have a lot of discussion about that, I think, but we've got to be cognizant of that because this is designed to, ultimately our goal is that every child in Louisiana would have the opportunity for an early childhood education in Louisiana. So that's where we are, that's what we hope will happen. Have a lot of other information on other aspects of the budget that I'm sure you're not as interested in, so I won't get into all that, but I'm happy to try and answer any questions if you have questions.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Dorn. Anyone have a question for Mr. Dorn? Yes, we do. Mr. Corbett?
Thank you. Commissioner, what could we do as a committee to make sure that we're first in line for when that money is recognized in May?
You need to communicate with the legislature. I mean, you're first in line with us. You don't need to worry about us. Our commitment is there. We tell you what we're going to recommend, but obviously the legislature will have to appropriate those dollars, whatever they may be, the ones that are there now as well as the ones that may be forthcoming. So I think you start with education committee leaders and folks on the education committee who are going to be the natural champions of education, and then the appropriation committee and finance committee are the two key committees that will vote on the budget and send it to the bodies as a whole. And anything you can do to talk to those members and emphasize the importance of this. It's going to take some educating because it took a lot of educating for us from a budget standpoint to understand why these early childhood dollars in particular ought to go to the areas that we've recommended that they be placed. Dealing with rates and why are rates so important? Why we can give the providers more money? Well, there's a reason for doing that, and making sure that legislators understand there's a rhyme and reason to the way we recommended the funding. So that it's not, it isn't just what the governor is saying we ought to do, it's what the department is recommending to us that we put in the budget. So I think we're on the same page here and advocating the same thing in terms of what we do with early childhood dollars. And for y'all to echo that to members of the legislature is very important.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Ms.
Thank you. I just want to commend you all, the governor, the leaders in this room for recognizing early care and education. I am probably the only representative of early care and education in here. And I have come to many meetings and listened quietly because I have a lot to learn as it relates to MFP. And this is the first meeting that really has excited me because I've heard so much about birth to 4. And I will say, as many of you all know, that 90% of brain development occurs between birth and 4, and it is a critical stage in life. And we are just honored and humbled that you all have prioritized that, and we thank you.
Thank you.
And
Anyone else?
Cindy, one of the things that just reminded me, it's important, I think, for legislators to understand that the rate increases that we're recommending need to go to pay hourly rates that are sufficient to attract the kind of people that are necessary to provide the training we need, and not simply go to the bottom line of the providers. And that's something that's not a specific part of the funding proposal, but it's something I think is going to be discussed in the legislature and ought to be discussed. The legislature put some language, for example, last year in pay raises that were given in the developmentally disabled community, some requirements that those monies go toward meeting hourly wages, and that's something that I think is important. We're not looking to just provide money for people to put in their pockets. We're providing this money so they can hire people who are qualified and who can do what needs to be done. So I think it's important that all of us recognize that as the reason why we're talking about these multiple millions of dollars that are going for rate increases, that they should not simply go to the bottom line of a provider.
And so what you're referring to is what we call the true cost of care. And that cost of care includes increasing wages to livable wages, not $9 an hour. It's lowering ratios is where we find quality in early care and education centers. It's making sure we have centers that have a variety of materials and modalities. All of those things cost a lot of money when you do it right. And so that when we think about these increased rates, we think about the true cost of care. Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very
Mr.
much. Nice to see y'all.
Thank you. Before going on to the next conversation, Mr. Doherty, I want to apologize for not recognizing our upcoming president, Mr. Garvey. Jim Garvey's here, sitting with us in the thank you for being here. I'd like to recognize our, we have 2 new.
The bridge was fun today.
We heard. Thank you so much for being here. We have Carl and
Wilfred.
thank you. I'd like to recognize Superintendent Brumley for a few words, and we'll move on with the discussion.
Thank you, Chair Lady Holloway. I appreciate that. I just wanted to begin by commending Commissioner Darden and his team. He's actually, but I told him I was going to brag on him rather he stayed or left. But understanding early childhood education funding is a challenge. And so between our team and his team, we shoved through that for several days and eventually got to a place that we feel really good about additional investments in early care and education that does move us closer to the true cost of care and ensuring that our youngest learners have the ability to access seats that are of quality. So I just want to commend him, even though he's exited on that, and just the way in which his team engaged with our team over key priorities. When we met with the commissioner's team around the budget for our office, which in some odd way also includes the MFP that funds out to our school systems, the first thing that I shared with the commissioner is the the first thing I want to call and raise to your attention is the need for an increase in teacher pay. And so I wanted to get that on the table first, have that conversation, and then we moved into these other very important areas that he also shared with the group. And I know that there will probably be sub-motions or potential other motions, but after experiencing MFP Task Force last year, I just felt like it might be a better approach this year, just to put something out on the table so that it could be a point of discussion, and then we could adjust as the committee sees fit. So I'm going to offer a suggestion to the group for consideration, and then Beth from our team is here to answer any technical questions that you may have. But my suggestion for the group is, one, to maintain the current per pupil expenditure in the MFP. Two, acknowledge and include the educator pay raise represented in the executive budget of $1,500 for classroom educators and other certificated staff, and $750 for support employees by placing these raises in level 4 of the MFP formula. Further, in a supplementary letter, request additional compensation for classroom educators and certificated staff should funding become recognized to a minimum of $2,000 for classroom educators. 3, provide a stipend of $2,000 for educators serving as teacher mentors to undergraduate and post-baccalaureate student residents, adding this to level 4 of the MFP formula. And finally, number 4, add language to the Career Development Fund to expand the allowable uses of these funds to include tuition for courses to attain dual enrollment career and technical education credit. So really 4 things. 1, maintain the present per pupil expenditure. 2, accept and acknowledge what is in the executive budget around $1,500 and $750. Add a supplementary letter to the legislature that if additional funds are recognized, that we would raise that pay for classroom teachers to a minimum of $2,000. 3, mentors who are working with resident teachers in terms of retention, recruitment and retention, being able to provide those mentors a stipend of $2,000 across the state. And then 4, as part of our global efforts to expand and elevate career and technical education, allow for the CDF funds to be used for dual enrollment courses, tuition in career and technical education. So that would be my suggestion, and understand that that's just a base of conversation, but I felt like it would be maybe a good approach to at least get something on the floor.
Thank you. Second, please.
I'll second.
Thank you.
I have a question also.
One second. Should we allow Beth to say anything? You're good. You're just here to answer questions. Okay, great. Thank you. I would like to recognize Dr. Pope.
Thank you. My first question, Superintendent Rumley, is will the benefits be included in that as far as Social Security insurance?
Yes, as like the other thing, really is the benefits are definitely going to be included.
And then on your 4th recommendation, would that be going into supplemental course choice? Or is that another level inside the MFP?
The 4th recommendation to change the wording to incorporate course tuition is in the Career Development Fund, which is already in the formula in level 4. It expands the ability of school systems on which they can spend that money, because it was identified that that was not being allowed because of the language, restricted language in the formula right now. It only provides for materials and equipment and teachers credentialing and training. And so the department felt like this would be a great use with the push to get more CTE courses.
So if we would like to recommend more per pupil in supplemental course allocation, how could we do that? Would that be a substitute motion?
That right?
Yes.
Yes.
Would like to increase it too? So the current MFP provides for $59 per pupil in grades 7 through 12. for supplemental course choice. And this is where we can pay for more dual enrollment courses, also courses dealing with STEM through our community colleges as well. And so this was increased to 26 per pupil in grade 7 through 12 in 2017 and 2018. And it's not been increased since then. So that's 4 years with no increase. And with all the work that we've done with the Dual Enrollment Task Force, our STEM Task Force, we're recommending that there's a renewed focus on increasing dual enrollment of students in both college courses as well as our Jump Start programs. So the fiscal note for 21-22 MFP indicates that supplemental course choice costs the state about $18 million or $56 per pupil. That equates to about $321K per dollar of supplemental course per pupil. So increasing per pupil to $70 would cost the state an additional $4.5 million. And so our recommendation is if more money is recognized, that we would include this. It's a prudent investment in our students and their futures, giving them a head start on their college degree and Jump Start programs, which will support them as adults moving forward.
Is that motion?
She substitute, you're adding that.
Yes, I'm adding to the
So can you
superintendent.
just be real, what is the recommendation increase, what, just without all the.
So from 59 to 70.
Like specific line item?
I'll have it written right here.
Does it written? Sharon, is that?
Supplemental course is 59 to 70. Is that 59 or just 26?
It was 26.
Ms. Howard,
Yes.
I'm okay with adding that as a friendly addition to my initial suggestion, as a bullet 5.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Amended motion.
I have a question.
Amended motion, just bear with us as we get all this technicality together. Nan?
So it's 59 to 70. It's currently 59, is that what you're saying?
Okay.
Amended motion, would you like to repeat?
Yeah.
With that. Second? I think Ms. G. Someone to second this bill, Dr. Mills?
Just a question on the
Stephen? Substitute.
Dr. Pope, you talked just a little bit more, because I'm trying to get all that. This is, what is this for again?
This is for supplemental course. This is where students can take dual enrollment. There's each student in grades 7 through 12 are allocated a per pupil amount. And this is where our school systems and our charter schools use this money for dual enrollment courses, community college courses, like through our Jump Start pathways and programs.
So this is then allocated to each school district as something they can use to offer more courses or pay more for people who are doing it. Should use some money.
It depends what course that's chosen for the students.
And that's chosen by the school boards.
The students and their parents choose it through their
Okay.
individual education plans. The school system does not choose, the students choose, which would help through especially through our Jump Start pathways.
Okay. Is it on menu that's approved by?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And just to clarify, this is an amendment, not a substitution. Right, we're amending.
Okay.
I'm friendly to that.
I just wanted to understand more information, that's all.
Dr. Berman?
Yeah, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to call up 2 individuals, just to give some basic background on number 2 in my suggestion, which is number 3, which is the mentor program. So Nicole Bonnet, I think, is in the room. Nicole, if you could give us just a little background on the mentor program.
While they're coming up, can I ask you a question? Number 1, do you have it where we can see all of those up? Everybody can see that? So we can see what the,
I do not have them in that way, but I'd be happy to
but on the
provide
other
them.
side, I'd like to ask why this is from level 3, we're going level 4.
Let's let Nicole, and then I'm going to ask Ken to talk about supplemental course, to explain that a little more, and then we'll
It's hard. Well, we should. Everybody can see.
Good morning, everybody. So with the mentor teacher stipend, what's being proposed is $2,000 for mentors who are serving to support both year-long undergraduate residents as well as post-bac residents. Post-bacs are your candidates that are completing a teacher program while serving as a teacher of record. So this funding will be instrumental in supporting those educators who are supporting our newest and pre-service teachers, and is something that is really instrumental in retaining teachers across the state, retaining both the new teachers, the teachers that they're supporting, but it also helps towards retaining more veteran educators that are looking for expanded scope, expanded reach, and mentoring gives them an opportunity to stay in the classroom, stay connected to kids, but also expand the impact that they're having by supporting new educators. If you guys want a little bit of background, we have been providing a stipend to undergraduate mentors for a number of years now. This was part of the transition package that was put into place when policy was revised to include year-long residency for all of our teacher prep programs. And so that is something that has been in place, and it's funded typically through 8G. Other funds have been used in the past. Every year it's sort of, where's the money? And so putting it in MFP would have a more stable funding source for it and ensure that these educators are being compensated for the countless hours that they are putting in supporting our newest educators.
Nicole, 1 second, please. You have a couple of questions.
Sure.
And I would like to recognize Dr. Gordon.
Everybody, I am intimately involved and supportive of the mentor teacher program, and I just wanted to call out and to thank Nicole for her excellent work and the work of her team. I also wanted to both clarify this and signify my support for it, because what this is, this could be a raise for educators, an additional raise of $2,000 for, by my estimate, maybe 3,000 educators that have gone through. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but this is a significant incentive for educators.
Yeah, so it would be for those serving in the role. And so we have about 1,800 new teachers that need support, both undergrad and post-bac combined. So yes, it would be essentially a raise for about 2,000 educators.
That actually answered one of my questions, was the number of people. So do we have a rough cost estimate then? I mean, I guess I could do the math in my head, but I'm not that good.
I think it's 2.6.
Right, it's about $2.6 million with the current estimates of we have right now. Obviously, it could go up next year, but when it's next year's formula, but it's about 800 of the undergraduates and about 500 of the mentors that support the post-bac candidates.
And then I thought I understood it to be an increased amount, but is it an increase or we're just shifting funds from 8G over to the MFP?
So it's both and. So for those mentors supporting undergrads, we've been able to give them a $1,000 stipend through 8G for a number of years. The mentors who support post-bacs get no money. So we have educators out there like giving freely of their time, and they're supporting folks that aren't sharing a classroom with them. Unlike the undergrads who are in a classroom working alongside of them. So they have to find time before school, after school, on their planning time to work and support the post-bacs. So this would give funding to those where no funding to
They would get $2,000, isn't being funded at all right now.
Correct.
And then the undergraduates, they are getting, what are they getting now?
They're getting 1,000 right now.
And this would move them to 2,000.
Correct.
And is the whole 2,000 from the MFP, or is it going to be like?
So right now, there are residents who are coming out of the College of Education. If you're a mentor supporting one of those new teachers, you're receiving $1,000 from 8G, which is not necessarily a stable, secure funding source year to year. Those mentors who are supporting teachers who are coming from an alternative pathway, not through that traditional college of education pathway, those individuals, mentors who are supporting those new teachers aren't receiving any form of a stipend. So what this would do is it would ensure that If you were supporting a teacher out of the College of Education, or you were supporting a teacher that was a career changer, in that role as a mentor, you would receive a $2,000 stipend. And it would not be covered out of AG any longer. It would become a function of the MFP.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing, I just want to make sure.
I just want to make sure I was kind of like explaining it.
And the rough cost is 2.6. All right, thank you.
And I would add, because I can't help but take the opportunity, I have always advocated for differentiated compensation, whether it's for most challenging schools or certificated areas that are the most high demand. And I think that this is one piece of a differentiated compensation model for the future, and I think it's worthy of consideration.
I add to this, Dr. Bromley, and I'm aware that in March, that there will be information coming forward to Betsy to increase from the AG mentors from 1,000 to 1,800. Can you give us some information on that and what happened?
Right. So I mean, this will be a place where, and Beth and Cole add in as you see fit, but this will be a place where the goal would be to have this funding secured and increased. It would be part of the MFP recommendation that the board would consider in March. And so it would take the place of having to use AG funding in future years to do this, which would then free up AG for other areas of interest of the board.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Cindy?
Thank you. First of all, I'm very excited to see that a pay raise has been prioritized. Our teachers, school employees, that need it, they deserve it. A couple of things I wanted to ask. First of all, when with the increase that Dr. Pope added on for the supplemental courses, so it's going to be 4.5. So how exactly does that work right now? So there's X amount of dollars that that's provided, and then the school systems make up the rest of it. I mean, so a course costs X amount of dollars. The state provides X amount, and so is there a cost that students or parents or districts are having to make up? How does that work?
Ron, you helped you.
Yeah,
Give a great
Ken
answer.
Bradford, Assistant Superintendent for the Office of Career and College Readiness. And I'll speak to two things. I'll speak to the supplemental course allocation, and I'll also speak to the career development funds. Start with supplemental course allocations. So historically, through 2017, there was $10 million annually for the supplemental course allocation. And the enabling legislation provided that was for courses not otherwise available at the school. And it requested that Betsy authorize a set of providers that could offer courses to these students that were not otherwise available at the school. In 2017, the funding was increased to approximately $17.5 million. It's divided up proportionately among the charter schools and the public schools. To give you an example, currently, that $17.5 million is funding approximately 45,000 student enrollments. Of those 45,000 student enrollments, 30,000 of them are dual enrollment courses that are core academic, English, math, science, social studies. 10,000 of them are technical courses like millwright, pipe fitting, welding, medical at a community and technical college. And the remaining 5,000 are private providers authorized by the board. To give you an example of those would be Associated Builders and Contractors on Highland Road and on the Bayou, where students can go there and learn carpentry, welding, millwright, electrical, etc. Another example would be Operation Spark in New Orleans, who offers programming and coding classes. Those funds are exhausted annually, and so I think the request here from Dr. Pope has been the funding is already being completely expended and exhausted, and if there's more opportunities to get students access to these type of courses, then that's where we go. I would say again, the legislation says that our our university systems are eligible courses in the course choice program, and then the board authorizes any private providers like Associated Builders and Contractors or Operations Partner. So I'll pause there and see if there's any supplemental course allocation questions.
What level is that in?
Level 4. And I think I heard a question also
Yeah,
about,
let's go back to Mr. Clayton.
just like,
They used to go in level 3.
So, Mr. Clayton, if you don't mind, that the whole committee can hear out, because I want your
I
answer.
follow that. We're good. I'm sorry.
I want your answer, your question answered for level 3.
yeah, I'll let Ms. Zeno defer to which level, because we're talking about supplemental course allocation is a certain level of the MFP, and then the career development fund is in a level of the MFP.
I'll just clarify that supplemental course is in level 4. It has been in level 4 for its entirety. It is that way because it is more of a categorical funding provision and allocation. Level 3 has been relegated to the old funding that we do completely on a per pupil basis. So it only contains very, very old pay raises, the historical, what used to be called hold harmless, and then the transportation and insurance per pupil.
Well, that's what I'm asking, the supplemental course is great. Just wondering why we're not taking the raises, placing them in level 3, where they continue. And then in the past, I know we've learned in the history, and Carl, correct me if I'm wrong or not, you would put the raises in level 3 because they'll be reoccurring because of expenses, and there's been no 2 point or any percent added in level 1 in many years. And I think from the history, if Mike was here or Doris was here, to fill us in on that and know that that stopped. And that helps some of the other issues we have, such as insurance purposes. You know, I don't know if many people I've been hit, and Carl's probably been hit worse than anybody, with insurance going up this year and the things that we have to continue with. So the question that I'm just trying to find out is why are we not offering the raises in level 3? Why are we putting them in level 4?
Well, starting with the 1920 raise, we did start that in level 4. It is really more appropriate the way that it's calculated now, with the legislation that governs the 1920 and the raise that's given this year allows for a more direct count of the staff and an incorporation of the retirement benefits. So the money is safe in level 4. They are to continue. It's just the math calculation gives it much more transparency and things in level 4. So that's why both of those most latest raises are in level 4 versus level 3.
Mr. Bryson, good?
I'm not good with
Not
that.
good.
I understand now. Doesn't mean I'm for it, but I'm good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone else on that topic? Because I think you go into another.
I finished with supplemental course allocation, and so we were going to clarify career development funds next.
All right. Anyone else?
I do have a question about dual enrollment. Does LASPA still maintain the data of the students enrolled in dual enrollment? Because I know historically that's what the case was. I wanted to know if they continue. Is that continuous? Are they is that the entity that maintains that data on how many students are enrolled, the numbers?
So there's 2 sets of data. I'll speak to that.
Okay.
There's probably 3 sets of data around dual enrollment. There is funding through LASPA for certain technical courses that are eligible for juniors and seniors, TOPS Tech, Early Start. That is managed through LASPA. So they will have a data set of courses that receive the $150 allocation for a technical course under TOPS Tech Early Start, which is for juniors and seniors and has a bunch of requirements. The Board of Regents also has a set of dual enrollment data that they have, that they receive from their institutions that says this many high school students were on our campus taking a dual enrollment course or who enrolled online, or one of the school system instructors who was an adjunct instructor for the university. So they have a set of data. And then the department, we have a set of data. We have a unique course code for dual enrollment courses. So for instance, if a student were to take dual enrollment U.S. history, we would have a unique identifier for that code in our student transcript system, which would be different than a traditional U.S. history. So we also collect the information. And then what we do is we work with regions through the Dual Enrollment Task Force, and we take their data that they had for students that were going to their campuses, and then we take it with ours and we reconcile that to make sure that we have an average number of dual enrollment students, and then we publish that annually in the dual enrollment report. Okay, if it's appropriate, Ms. Hollow, Mr. You have a question?
Dr. Moore?
Yes, Dr. Mills.
I still, it's not dual enrollment related, but I still have some additional questions.
Do you want to complete dual enrollment? Are we done?
Well, wait, if there's supplemental course of dual enrollment, we should
Yeah,
take it.
go right ahead.
It's not in regards to dual enrollment.
Okay.
Anybody else have dual enrollment questions? Okay, let's proceed to the next item. Dr. Mills, you or Morgan? Either one of you, or you have 3 people on deck. Let's go.
I also, as the leader of the Louisiana Association of Educators, also greatly appreciate that our educators are being prioritized during this session because there have been a number of different hardships that our colleagues have had to endure throughout the pandemic, be it merged classes and having to cover those classes, working through COVID, classes being covered during planning periods. And so the question that I have, and this is probably not for this committee at all, is there something that we can do or commit to in the future in the event where, because the association did to get a bill passed with the 45-minute uninterrupted planning period during this time where educators are covering classes during that planning period. I know that there are some districts that are compensating those educators for that, but then there are some districts who are not. So I do have some questions about that, and maybe it's not for this group.
But I don't think it is, but it brings me to this, and I apologize, Mr. Lance, has that he is our new education chair. I said so. He's the man. Thank you so much for being on this here today on this committee, and there's just so much that we have to learn and inquire about, and all working together, partnering. So appreciate you. T, I'm sorry, I don't think we have the answer for you, but I think you know who to go to.
I'm just we talked about this.
Okay, all right, but thank you. Okay, I appreciate that. Any more questions, Tim?
That's
You're good, thank you. Dr. Gordon.
So I just wanted to start with a comment, and then I have 2 areas of questions. So first, I wanted to compliment State Superintendent Kate Brumley on 2 things specifically. One, his consistent support for teachers throughout the years, both in base level raises and further differentiation and career development. You shouldn't have to be a principal just to make more money. Giving options like mentor teachers, instructional coaches, literacy coaches has been a phenomenal boon to our state. Second, I also want to compliment him for setting forth a focused and organized meeting with his motion or his plan that he has proposed. Frankly, as y'all know throughout the years and all my different motions, his motion is far better organized than anything I ever did. I thought that would at least get a chuckle, y'all. I did want to say too, there are 2 areas that I would like to talk about and see if this committee has the will to do so. And I think first, and without any disrespect to Chairman Harris, I think that whenever we say, I love the idea of saying like, hey, if there's more money, let's be the first in line. If there's more money, let's have the 2,000. I think we know that there's going to be more money. That was pretty openly said at the beginning of the meeting. And I did do some math because I remember myself and Mr. Wilfred talking about Texas and Texas's raise and comparing it to Louisiana last year. And I think too, we've got Mississippi. And I actually did some math. My calculator could barely handle it, so I had to use exponents too. But we've got a proposal for a $150 million teacher raise out of a $38.6 billion budget in Louisiana. Now that equals to 0.0038% of that budget. In Mississippi, they unanimously passed out their Republican Senate a $4,700 raise. Now you might say, hey, look, they got a smaller budget, they have less teachers, so that's why percentages are important. If you take that $210 million proposal and note that the budget, the entire budget of the state of Mississippi is $6.4 billion. That brings us to a 0.03% of their budget, meaning that in terms of priority for education, that's 10 times what is currently being prioritized in the state of Louisiana for an increase in teachers. And I'd say, growing up in Louisiana, I hope I don't hurt anyone's feelings with this, but time and time again, I thought to myself, I'd never be saying, let's copy Mississippi. But frankly, that's what I'm saying. Because time and time again, we've seen Mississippi do allocations, whether it's towards literacy, towards instruction, towards teacher raises, that is far beyond the priorities of our legislature. So I say all to say that I'm in support of what Dr. State Superintendent Brumley has brought forth today. If there's any will to figure out a way, because I love that clause in there, to push that minimum of 2,000 to 2,500 or anything like that, I would certainly support that today. 3,000 even better. But then I also wanted to say too, that I know that on the topic of differentiated raises, and we've done a really great job of differentiating additional priorities and performance for teachers, but I think there's something that we haven't really talked about that would be a huge boon to our state, and that is differentiated raises based on geography. Frankly, because the way that we have structured our taxes and the responsibilities of local government, there are certain parishes that no matter what they try or what they can do, cannot get a raise for teachers. They simply don't have the tax base. And I'm talking about places over like Tensall Parish. I mean, with a homestead exemption of $75,000 to start, there's not many places that are going to have that value in Tensall Parish. There are a number of districts, and I'm not sure how to word it, but I definitely would impart that we're looking at differentiated raises, we're looking at further money. A great way to get our state to the southern average is to look where we're far, far, far below average in those districts. There are a number of districts in this state that are paying under $40,000 a year for teachers. And they've tried, and there's simply nothing they can do because they don't have the tax base or even the local support to compensate for that. If there's some additional compensation or allocation or pot of money that we can start year by year bringing these districts up, then it'll make them more competitive with other districts. It'll help stabilize the inflow and outflow of teachers between different districts, and it'll make sure that our state average and the southern average continues to climb in competitiveness. So I wanted to kind of put that out there and see, just open that all up to discussion. But thank you again for the wonderful proposal. I think it's a great start.
Thank you, Dr. Corbill. Cindy?
Thank you. So, again, we're very excited to see a raise proposed, probably the largest in a long time. But LFP has advocated, if we're to reach the southern regional average, I know the governor said he wanted to do it by the end of his term, I think we need to be a little bit more aggressive. 2,500 this year, 2,500 next year. And, I think it bears looking into that maybe we need to find some type of indices so that we can, put a cost of living on there so that we don't get so far behind, because it's hard to find the money. We recognize that. And, as far as differentiating pay rates, with those schools that you guys are talking about, you might want to consider to see if people who don't want to go to some of those schools, is it actually pay or is there something else? Because from what we've heard in the districts, in the buildings, is that they don't want to go to those schools simply because it's almost impossible to stay there under the accountability system. And so that's something that I do think we need to look at. And then Dr. Polito brought up the true cost of care in early childhood. Again and again, we've talked about what is the true cost of education. And we've had motions, we've had this, we've had resolutions at the legislature. We still do not know, and we've never known how much it actually costs to educate a child. And so I urge you, this is something that we really need to take a look at and find out so that we can move forward understanding what the cost is rather than just throwing money at it in the dark. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'll come back. They're gonna be tired.
I'm sorry, Ms. Romer, just realizing you're here.
I just walked in, apologies, have unfortunately been over at the Capitol. Just to that point, I have heard that suggested that we do a review of what it costs. Can someone tell me what the arguments are not to do that? Like, what's been the barrier to us moving that forward? Because there may be real reasons, and I just don't know them.
Thank you.
Like, is there a careful what you wish for thing, or?
Your question around is the cost of education
Yeah,
study?
I've heard, again, former Superintendent Falk and others suggest that it's time to do that review, and I just didn't know what the reasons maybe not to.
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly talk about that beyond today. I know that you've raised it before. I don't know that I necessarily have a reason for or not at this moment. but-
I'm sorry, Dr. Woodward, may I ask again, what
Yeah,
review?
and correct me if I'm wrong, Caroline, but last year, as part of this discussion, there was discussion last year around some form of study group to determine the cost of education per child. Is that right?
Yeah, I've been around a long time, some say too long, but maybe not long enough to know how we got to that amount that we currently kind of have as our base and all of that. Just historically, I'm lacking in understanding that process. And what I keep hearing, and again, heard it today, is maybe it's time to do a review of that number. And I just don't know if there's a reason, and maybe there's somebody else here that would say it's not a good reason. Maybe the number comes back lower than what we're doing. I don't know what the reasons may be.
So historically, that number has been in place, or the basis for that number, as Mike or Doris would agree, was set about many years ago. And there were some agreements made with those cost increases that got us where we are today. I think what needs to be shared about a cost study is that it is very, very involved. Most states spend millions of dollars to hire has to be some experts. They have them across the country, different universities, similar to the firm that we hired back in the early 90s to do the redesign of the formula. But it is a very lengthy and involved multi-year process. There are methodologies to do this that these professors and these experts utilize. There are different ways to do the way you look at cost. All I can say is it's very, very involved because they want to ensure that what comes out is that true. You know, it's not like a number that you can press or even a math calculation you can press to figure it out. You have to look at the whole, the whole pot of what it takes to educate a child. And so I will just offer that as an explanation about what would be necessary if by some chance the state wanted to go down that route. And there are opportunities. There's lots of resources we can read about what happens in other states. They're not as prevalent redoing those costs as maybe, say, 5 to 6 years ago. But there are methodologies and abilities, but it is very costly because it would have to be someone with the expertise to do that.
Do you have an idea of the cost? Like, just a roundabout figure when you're saying this?
Yeah, at today's standards, it would at least cost $2 million because of the length of time and the necessary involvement of the, you'd have to do an RFP, which that in of itself takes almost 12 months these days under the rules of our state procurement laws. And then the time it would take for a firm to do that, what I understand these days from other states is it is possibly a multi-year investment of time and money.
Yes, Ms. Roller?
Just to that point, I understand cost and spending your dollars wisely, but I would argue, I've been in my seat for 14 years and we haven't done it. So it seems like, maybe it is the right time to review that for all the different reasons that's been discussed, and then to argue that, you spread that couple million out over 14, 15, however many years it's been, then it's really not as costly, long-term. But again, this is very much out of my wheelhouse, so I just wanted to be more knowledgeable about why we wouldn't do it. And so I appreciate at least the concern about the lift, we'll call it, the big lift. Thank you.
Any other comments on that? Mr. Klaus?
I think part of what I understand, I don't want to be the dead horse, I'm a lot newer to this than you are, Strong, but if the 2.75 had continued over the years, we would be sitting at, if I'm guesstimating right, over 5,000 per child. Am I correct, Christina? Is that right, Ms. Beth? Because over the years, it's not been incorporated in the formula. So the 2.75, the student allocation would be a lot higher than it is today. I don't know what happened back then. I know we've had that argument every year since I've been with this. And I'd like to make a motion. I love everything you're putting forward, Mr. Bromley, but I'd like to move the teachers' raises and staff to level 3 and add a 2.75 to this formula. In level 1.
1 second. Is this a substitute motion?
I don't know if I got to the point, but I'm going to try.
You want to include everything Dr. Brumley said?
I would just like to take the salaries, put it into the level 3, because if what I'm reading and I understand, it will be continued through legislation, and also the supporting the increases in already states that will have the retirement, the fuel cost, all the benefits. And then I'd like to add a 2.75 level 1. So let our student allocation.
A second, please.
Can I ask a question before I say?
Question?
Putting it at 3 makes it permanent?
Yes.
Wait, 1 second. Maybe I know what we need to do here before we move further. Ms. Sino, please explain as much as you know.
I'm not really understanding the rationale to put it in level 3 because it is secure in level 4. The intent behind level 3 at its origination was really different than the theoretical and math that we use to calculate these new pay raises. So there would be no advantage of putting it in level 3. There's no additional benefit. The same amount of money would actually be generated. We moved by some reason the 1920 pay raise was actually placed in level 3, and it was very confusing, and there was a lack of transparency, and it really did distort some of the calculations. And so we moved to, we suggested, and Bessie and the legislature adopted, that the pay raises be moved to level 4, which again provides all the benefits of the money, and is very transparent. So that's really the benefit of it being a level 4. There is no ability, once it's in the MFP, it takes a vote of not only Bessie but the legislature to remove anything. We've really not ever, in the 20-something years I've been doing this, ever removed anything from the MFP. We may not have, had the 2.75 be automatic, but any of the other components have really only had minor revisions. So you can help me understand.
But my understanding, there were some years that they weren't placed in there, and it's not funded again. It's a one-time payment. So I understood that before level 3. But my understanding from, I'm still younger than a lot of people in here dealing with MFP, that the level 3 is secure through legislation. It can't be taken away. And that's the main reason. And then it also includes the benefits. When I started looking at the notes that we have through 3 and 4, that doesn't equal. I don't see it in level 4. I'm listening to it, but I'm not seeing it.
Well, what you're speaking of is the years in which there was money appropriated as a stipend instead of a pay raise. And so that is not what is going on right now. That has nothing to do with the level that it's in. It is the language in the resolution that is adopted by the legislature. So there were years in which money was outside the formula, and it was not in the formula, but that was issued as a stipend. And if it was not rolled in the next year, that was a problem. I understand, but it has no relationship to the level in which it's in. The language, as I understand it, all we have right now in the executive budget is language that says the amount of the pay raise. It is up to Bessie for us to craft the language with regards to the 1,500 and 750, to say what happens and how the math will go out and will be distributed. As long as that is adopted by Bessie and then adopted by the legislature, it becomes a permanent pay raise. So it's really more about the content of the language and the fact that it becomes inside the formula itself that retains that permanency.
I still want to stick with up. That's
That's a motion. We have a motion, but you have a question.
Well, yeah, I guess I had a question, because, so basically, trying to listen to both sides here. Okay, you know what, I'll second. I really appreciate going through the 2.75 years of science budget.
Dr.
I have a question. In any of the motions or the substitute motions, does it specifically speak to when more money is recognized that the support professionals would also receive an increase? Does it mention that in any of them?
My suggestion, which I don't know who made the motion based on my suggestion, but the motion that was originally on the floor calls for the 1,500, 750, but if additional funding is recognized, that would be at a minimum of $2,000 for classroom educators and certificated staff.
Okay, so that does not speak to the other support workers, am I correct?
My motion is for $2,000 for up a minimum of $2,000 in a supplementary letter for classroom teachers and certificated staff.
So that it doesn't mention that in any of the others, correct?
No.
I would like to offer a friendly amendment that all support workers be included in that proposal. I'm sorry. Excuse me.
We don't have to
Not the
We don't have a
2,000,
friendly amendment.
from the, I mean, does it mention the 750 to the 1,000? Can that be mentioned in there?
Yeah, well,
We set out a
I think what's happening, we're convoluted.
Right, I was trying to ask a clarifying question about all of the original motion, and there was an amendment, a friendly amendment to the original motion, and then there was 2 substitute motions that were made. So that's it, there are no longer any additional motions that could be made, any substitute motions. So I was just asking if whether or not, so I will allow it to have, the vote to go, and then I do want to add a friendly amendment to, I would like to add a friendly amendment to all 3 if possible.
So we're understanding this is a substitute to the substitute.
It is not a substitute. Yeah, this is for the substitute to the substitute. And then if this one fails, then if we have to go to the original one, if the 2 substitute motions fail, if we get back to the original motion, I would like to add a friendly amendment to that one as well.
So you make it.
Let's do it.
Am I making sense when I say that?
You have to have a second.
Okay.
We need a second to talk to this.
Okay.
And that was to add the support staff.
The
Dr.
maker,
Rowling, add
I thought the
additional
maker had to
funds.
accept the friendly amendment. It doesn't need a second. They just have to accept it.
I'm making mine.
No, there's no friendly amendments in Robert's rules.
Okay.
You have to make a substitute motion and add this. It's not. If he could choose to accept it, but it's not.
Oh, one second, Dr. Corfield, Dr. Tia, you have a question or trying to understand, right?
Yes, yeah, that's it, yeah.
Okay, so you have, first, you made a motion for an add-on, and he's saying he wants his to stay, remain as is, and then there's a question here.
By her making a substitute motion instead of making a motion after Superintendent Claxton's motion, does she not, by substitute motion, remove Superintendent Claxton's motion?
No, we're getting some.
No. But on hers, then his, then has each bill. We can have as many substitutes.
So where we are is voting on Dr. Tia's recommendation of, as an amendment to Dr. Bromley's suggestion about the 750 that you want to add in case, okay, there's additional funds to increase.
What was that amount again, Dr. Nichols?
It's the,
1,000?
yes, the 1,000, if it is recognized for the, support.
Should additional funds be available, they're recognizing.
Increase the raises to a minimum of 2,000 for certificated staff and 1,000 for non-certificated staff should additional funds be realized from the process.
And do we need a second?
I'll second.
Dr. Cornell seconds. Any objection? Oh, we're not voting. All right, we're not voting. Any discussion?
So then we have an estimate on how much that would cost? If we
Good point. We don't, I don't.
okay. I mean, we have a ballpark, I guess.
Deb? Yes. He's asking to have the cost analysis of adding 1,000 to the sports staff.
Well, and it would really be, okay, I guess.
Not the third one. Over with the original one.
It's really the cost of going to 1,000, but the cost of going from 750 to 1,000. Right, that's.
And that's a hypothetical, should additional funds be realized.
Yeah, make it more. But yeah,
I mean, just using some simple math, if it's 100 million per 1,000, then, 250 would be 25 million.
I think that's for the overall cost of the teacher and the support staff.
Oh, gosh, then it'd be even less.
Yeah.
Yeah. We want to talk like 12 million.
Are we waiting for anyone else? No, okay. Does that answer any of the questions?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, next would be to solve, and go back to Mr.
When did we adopt that?
No, I'm hearing, yes,
That's on the floor, yes,
It's on the
that's
floor.
currently the motion on the floor.
but we need to go back to Mr.
Not unless hers fails. If hers passes, then we're going
So
to.
now we're voting on yours.
If we're ready to vote, is there any more discussion?
Any more?
Yeah, I just want clarity on what we're voting
Yeah.
on.
Okay, so we're voting on everything you wanted, adding the moving the, with the amendment to move to level 3 as opposed to level 4,
Just the salaries.
and a 2.75 increase in level 1, and then adding the $1,000 raise.
So that's all,
Okay.
so not separate amendments?
Wait, I think
I
there's
thought
some
it was
confusion
just
here.
that.
Ms. Davis, hold on one second, I think, as well as I am, I'm like, are we getting ready to vote for everything?
My understanding was that you made a substitute motion to change that portion of the overall original motion presented by Dr. Grumby. Is that correct? You wanted
Yes.
everything he had, but his is on the floor right now, so you're after his, so I'm assuming that you were accepting his as well. Were you not accepting his and yours, the level 3 to?
Yes,
Okay, so that is what we're voting on. The substitute here, plus the change to, from 750 to 1,000.
And level 4 to level 3.
Yes.
Comment, Dr. Brown?
My comment is more around Mr. Claxton's comments. I think Ms. Sino has agreed that with that being in level 4, that is permanent, right? Ms. Sino, okay. But aside from that, the 2.75 increase, I think we just have to be mindful, and I appreciate the advocacy you're making, Superintendent Claxton, certainly on behalf of yourself and systems around the state. I think where we have to be mindful is this will go to Bessie as a recommendation. Bessie then will then make a recommendation to the legislature. The legislature then accepts or rejects. You know, they don't modify, they accept or reject. And one of the challenges I think that we are very realistically going to face with the addition of a 2.75, which is probably somewhere between 75 and $100 million, I don't know exactly, is we will hear that school systems have received $4 billion in federal stimulus funds that can be used from now until 2024. And I don't know the appetite, I can't speak for the legislature, but I know that that is going to be a question that we hear if that particular amendment is added.
And I know you know where I'm coming from also with this, but insurance costs, device costs, updates, yes, we've got a lot of money from the federal government, but that can't be used for some of these normal operating that we do. And you sat in this position too and understand that if this had been funded, I will say it again, for the past years, we would not be sitting at $4,000 per child, we would be up to $5,000 per child. And that goes in to part of the transportation. And I don't see that in level 4. Now Beth can tell me it's all there, I'm going to believe what she says. But when I'm reading and talking to the people that have been here for years, level 3 is the secure, it's reoccurring, it can't be taken away. And then when you're giving me these forms, and I'm sure they're just notes, and I keep going through it, and I'm reading level 3, historic allocations, support for increased mandated costs. We need them. Yes, I've been able to spend my ESSER funds on a lot of different stuff, but I've not been able to pay it along.
May I clarify? So the level 3 that you're speaking of, there is a component in level 3 that has been there a long time that specifically speaks to insurance and retirement and things like that. That per pupil amount has been the same for a number of years. And so that is permanently in level 3, but it is specific to the cost that you're speaking of. If there are some other questions I can answer about that particular one if you want.
I'm just telling you what you provided this whole committee with. And it states, I don't see all this in level 4 like it's in level 3. And traditionally, when you're looking at level 3, we've had this argument, I guess this is probably my 4th, 5th year on this, it's been the same argument. And the 2.75 has been over and over. And we've not argued this, and I give, legislation's going to fund it, they're going to kick it back to Betsy if it doesn't work. But if this has been running for years, we wouldn't be in this situation. And I now listen to Ms. Romer say, you know, she's been here longer than I have. And she would, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but would you be a lot better off, Ms. Romer, with that? Sorry.
Yeah, at least we're vegetarian.
Not these, this one.
Ms. Eden. Sorry, Ms. Eden. Here. Does this help Mr. Perry?
So we're voting on all this together, is that correct? All of these points. I would just say to echo what the superintendent said on 2.75, I just feel like dollars that are out there on the table right now, this is not the right time for the public and for the legislature, whatever, to do this. I mean, there is so much money out there, and from everything I read, there's a tremendous amount of flexibility for the district. Yes, there are guardrails, but there's also a tremendous amount of flexibility. And I think the legislature and the public is going to want to see how those dollars are spent, how they're managed, how they're targeted, how they're used to help kids who make up for the loss of learning that they've had, as well as the other expenses that they folks have talked about. I just feel like, just from a broad public thing, it would be better for us to see and use those dollars where we can, see how they're being used, make sure there's accountability there, and before we go and put a permanent increase in the fee. So, just my comment.
Yes.
I just wanted to follow up what Mr. Irwin said, and obviously someone that I respect tremendously, but I think that is the perception, and that perception is absolutely wrong. We have the federal government giving districts millions of dollars to pay for very specific things, such as certain professional development, and that money, no matter how, someone could give you $100 million, But if you can't spend it on your electricity bills, if you can't spend it on devices, if you can't spend it on repairing your infrastructure, your buildings, if you can't spend it on your dilapidated bus fleet, you can't spend it to try to hire more substitute teachers so teachers aren't having to watch everyone else's class, then what's the point? That money is useless. We need money that's actually flexible and is helping to deal with inflation. I mean, frankly, I think Superintendent Claxton's right. If we had a 2.75% inflationary increase every year, we wouldn't even need to meet y'all. We could all just go hang out and have lunch. But two, inflation is 7% in 2021. 7%. Even at 2.75%, that is conservative. Now, the good thing is with monetary inflation, we'll see continued and persistent increases in state revenue, but we've got to make sure that we're the first in line. And there's a lot of people with their hands out, so we've got to make sure we're first in line. I do think that what Mr. Superintendent Claxton put out there is good. I mean, it's necessary, and I think we should defer to him, frankly, because he's the one that's having to manage this money in Jackson Parish.
Anyone else? Yes, Ms. Perry.
Following up on that, so historically, LEPCS has been very vocal about the 2.75 and further that it go in level 1 so that districts in charter schools can make decisions as close to their classrooms on how to spend those dollars. We have been unsuccessful in that advocacy. And unfortunately, you know, I think that you're right. The perception is one thing, that we are right now have coffers full, when many of charters would tell you it is just filling gaps for them. But, you know, perception and reality run into each other. And I think that what you have to decide here is the reality is I do not believe this can pass. I do not believe the legislature will pass this. I don't believe Bessie will pass this. So to me, we're debating, do we present something that sets the table for further discussion and argument that ultimately does not result, in my opinion, in more dollars? I don't. I think what the department has brought forward is what realistically can probably get through. I'm not saying that I disagree with what the second motion is, the alternative motion, but I just think the reality is such that it will not get through. I would like to see more advocacy personally around the surplus that currently exists, and that those dollars be used, for example, in paying down the UAL to bring us relief as charters and districts on the cost that's costing you on a per student basis, what, $1,000, $1,300 per student, that if that UAL was paid down could be used for all of those things, including the supplemental staff and things like that. So unfortunately, I cannot support the motion, but it is because for the first time, I'm looking more at what I think the reality is, but I definitely support where we need to get this formula and the idea that we need to do a better job in advocating on behalf of our schools about what the realities are and not just the perceptions. Thank you.
Ms. Eno, can you brief us on what federal dollars are allocated for? Like, what can schools use this dollar for? You know, there was a talk here about they can't use it for the bus, they can't use it for someone's.
Yeah, we're going to ask, I don't know, Dr. Kimmel or is Danielle, you wanted to come and just briefly give an overview of the stimulus dollars. Danielle Mitchell, Deputy Chief of Staff, Department of Education, can come and give a brief overview of that. While she walks up, $4 billion essentially over multiple allocations, with the last allocation running for expenditure through 2024. School systems around the state, traditional public charter, and non-public have created budgets around the allowable uses of those funds. And like Mr. Irwin has suggested, there is a great deal of flexibility around that. Maybe not ultimate flexibility, but certainly a great deal of flexibility. And we have tried to work with systems to help support that flexibility along the way. But if you want to give just a few comments, Danielle, or take any questions.
Sure. as Dr. Brumley mentioned, our school systems receive 90% of our total state allocation. So we are not able to direct them to spend their dollars in any specific way. The other 10% of that, there is a 5% administrative portion that we keep here at the state to administer the program. The other 9.5%, actually, we are flowing out the majority of those funds to our school systems through a variety of various allocations tied to different initiatives. So any specific questions that would be helpful to answer, I'm happy to do so.
I'd like to go back, you just asked us to correct what your statement was, that the money is allocated to us in trying to process. Did we have no ties to that on how we spent that? Is that basically what you said?
The money that was allocated to the state, the $4 billion, 90% flows out to our school systems. There is allowabilities that come associated with these federal funds. School systems have to spend those dollars within the allowabilities, but as Dr. Brumley stated, those allowabilities are very wide-ranging. We can support our school systems by providing guidance, but we cannot direct them in how they spend their portion of it.
And that was my question, can you give
That's my question.
how, I mean, what are they allowed to expend that dollar?
Well, it has to be submitted into the super app. It has to be approved. If it's not approved, we can't spend it. So I'm grateful for it, don't get me wrong. But there is a lot we can't spend it on. Now, going through ESSER 2, ESSER 3, EB, 1, 2, I mean, we've dealt with a lot. I mean, it has been overwhelming, especially for a small system. I don't have people I can just sign to do all this, so we're doing triple jobs. But there are, and I think this is probably going to before we go, there are things we can't spend it on. I can't spend it on electric bill. There have been incidences where we've been able to purchase buses because we were trying to do COVID to separate kids in those areas, but not just to go buy ones. And then, we've been able to do some facility things, yes, but there are guidelines. And there are certain things we have to follow. It's just not open full range go. And I don't know if that's what we're trying to get to.
No, I think that we're arguing different points. I think going back to what Ms. Romer indicated, reality of what you're discussing, it's true, but there's also perception, and there is what I think probably some of us believe will actually pass through. And I'm not arguing that it's 7% inflation. I'm not arguing that an MFP dollar is more flexible than an allocation from the feds that we help handle for you all. And I know it's been a stress on local systems. It's been a stress on us too. But I think the point that I would go back to is just indicating that we're going to have to go to the table on this eventually at the legislature and just having a sense of what has a chance to be successful in moving forward. And everyone will have their own belief on what can move forward and what will pass.
And that's been the same conversations we've had now. I've done this for 5 or 6 years. It's what will pass. I get the common sense part of it, but we keep coming back. When the funding's not coming in certain areas, the allocations for kids or the raises, it makes us, and I get it, I keep watching these committees, and I'm not here as far as person to true, but these committees, things come out, nothing gets approved, or it gets changed, or it's thrown around. Why do we have them if we're not going to listen to the people at the table? That's all.
Thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing.
I want to go back to her comment.
Her,
At the table.
I'm sorry.
We talked about a perception challenge out there. So her comment was school systems got 90% of the money and they get to choose on how they want to spend it. That is not an accurate statement. And that's why we have a perception problem out there, especially with our legislature, that it's just a free-for-all and we can all go shopping. That is not accurate.
So just to clarify, the statement was that school systems can spend those dollars not at the direction of the state within the allowabilities. So with these ESSER funds, they include not only all of the ESSA programs, but additional flexibilities, no supplement, not supplant rules. So there are additional flexibilities with these ESSER dollars, but there are a few limitations. And so I would just say that the regulations outlined with these ESSER dollars do provide our school systems with immense flexibility in how they can utilize those funds.
So, just a simple question. If the feds say that the school systems can spend their ESSER funds in a certain way, has the department denied a school system by using the Fed guidelines?
Our review process for budgets and EGMS do follow the federal guidelines. So I am not aware of any denial that would not be in alignment with the federal regulations.
Superintendent, you heard that. Follow up.
Happy to. I have fielded questions informally from system leaders who might want to build, a new gymnasium or purchase band uniforms or different types of expenses such as that. We have not been supportive of let's go build a new gymnasium with federal stimulus dollars. But if there's a particular system, Dr. Pope, with a particular need, happy to have a conversation about it in terms of what has been or has not been approved.
And again, it just goes back to the perception. It goes back to the perception that our school systems could spend this money any way that they want to. And it's my understanding that when our school systems used the Fed guidelines, that they were told that there were other state guidelines on that. And so I just, again, want to clear the air about perception when we do go to the Capitol on this, that it's not a free-for-all and that the school system's got to choose, even using Fed guidelines.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Yes.
So I was the guy on the 2.75 last year. I was the person on the sword about that last year. I just want to clarify, it's not a fair statement to say that the ESSER money replaces an outright 2.75% increase. The 2.75% increase is completely flexible at the local educational agency. The ESSER money is not completely flexible. It can do a lot. I handled, I guess because of my background, I did the original ESSER budget for our parish, personally, on an Excel spreadsheet for a 3-year deal. I've had to rewrite several things 3 or 4 times to get them through the approval process because I didn't mention the word COVID enough. I didn't mention academic recovery enough. I didn't, there are the things that it's allowable for, right? So I mean, let's be clear. The 2.75% and the ESSER money are not interchangeable 100% of the time. They're just not. So that's all. That's the point I think everybody's trying to make.
And that's no different than the point that I've made.
Sure.
They're not interchangeable.
They're not.
Dr. Gordon.
Thank you. So I wanted to just kind of bring up, because it happens every year, so I'm starting to get my deja vu again, the idea of being reasonable. So one, I do of course think that Superintendent Claxton is being beyond reasonable. And then 2, I recognize that if you have a different perspective, like Ms. Romer, there's no way that I can convince you that, someone's unreasonable or someone's unreasonable or anything like that. It's all a matter of perception and perspective. If we were all in Mississippi, we're all unreasonable because they're doing far more than all of us. That being said, I want to change that paradigm. Do any of us, and I don't want to say any of us have to be reasonable, but is this a committee where the paradigm is reasonability? Because if we look at this sheet right here, we see that this is the recommendations of the MFP committee in 2021. And then Betsy took our recommendations and added to them. So we were in this committee trying to pass something that was reasonable. And Betsy at that time said, hey, we're going to add more to it. This idea and this obsession of what is reasonable and what is not reasonable, You know, we juxtapose that with sending a message and talking about perception. The only way we're going to change a perception is as us as a committee unifying. Look, if we send a list of 10 things to Bessie and they go with 8, that's a whole lot better than sending a list of 4 things and then they add 2. It's all about negotiating. And if we're going to send a message that there is a need, we really need to get away from this idea of whether something is reasonable or can pass. Bessie, our job is to send a recommendation to Bessie. It's not like Bessie to the legislature where it's yes and no. It's a recommendation to Bessie, and they can add to it or they can take away. But I think the right thing to do is that we send a recommendation that we feel confident with is the right thing to do in our hearts. And I think we've kind of all said our piece. I really appreciate everybody's, from both Dr. Mills and Superintendent Clark.
Appreciate your comments. Okay, next, Dr. Steve.
It's a tough one. No, this is, something that perpetually comes up, this task force, and I appreciate it. It is difficult, because I think we have different perceptions of what we should be doing. And it's really a difference of the question of what is the best proposal, given a certain set of money that's been in the executive budget and been proposed. And what's the best use of that funding? And is that some combination of a percent increase, formula increase versus a teacher pay raise? Then the other one is just, what is the best thing that we want, regardless of how much has been proposed? And they're both legitimate, and I understand both of them. I personally lean toward trying to fit within the 4 corners of the budget proposal, with the understanding that there could be additional money and that could be spent differently. I understand that. And my reason for that is, because if you ask for more money than that, you have to go take it away from someone else, whether that's healthcare or early childhood or public safety or from the taxpayers for the tax raise. And that's beyond, I think, the scope of this. So I understand the aspirational goals, and I don't hold that against anyone. I completely think that's a legitimate way of doing it. That's not how I, from my position, try to view this. I try to think within the amount we have, what's the best way to spend that money? And let me be clear, I'm really sympathetic to the formula increases, but I also believe in them because I want to see innovation and I want to see flexibility. And I just don't think that if I said, hey, let's substitute out whatever the amount is, we have $150 million to make that instead of teacher pay raise, we make it formula increases and give total flexibility to the locals. I just don't think that's going to be a lot of support. I don't think I'd make it out the door. So I am incredibly sympathetic to that. But my different viewpoint is to try and stay within the 4 corners. Secondly, I'm just going to have to, on the technical issue of which level, I'm going to have to defer to staff on that, especially since it seems to be putting in the proposed level, original proposed level is a little more transparent. And so for those reasons, I think I like the original proposal for the superintendent. Though I completely understand why people have done this.
Thank you. Ms. Cousins.
I just, for a point of clarification, you mentioned staying within the 4 corners of the executive budget. I believe that when the governor advocated for the additional funding, if it's recognized in May, that he also advocated for the raise for support staff from $750 to $1,000. I think that if we didn't do that, we would be very remiss, because these employees have been covering classes for teachers because of the teacher shortages. We have custodians who are actually covering classes. They have gone far and above, and to not consider them to get the additional money, I think would be a great injustice. So I would urge you guys to remember that. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Ms. Davis, can you go line by line in the first recommendation that Dr. Brumley had?
Well, we would be voting on Ms. Mills' motion, but would you like?
Okay. We're going to first.
Yes. So there would be to increase in 2 points by 2.75 in level 1, a $1,500 pay raise for teachers, and a $750 support staff raise in level 3. A supplemental letter to be submitted if funds are realized to request an overall increase of $2,000 for teachers and $1,000 for support staff. In level 4, the use in the Career Development Fund
to use that fund for dual enrollment and career tech as well as in level 4 to increase the supplemental course fee to $70. Oh, with the mentor teachers, I apologize, $2,000 increase for mentor teachers. All mentor teachers.
Does that not include the level 3?
I'm sorry.
Salaries for level 3.
I said level 3.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Specify that with the
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's the motion that's on the floor, right? Whereas Dr. Bromley recommended level 4, Mr. Claxton level 3, and that's where we have the tiers. So where are we? What do we do first? On all of this?
Question, so the only two differences from Dr. Brumley's recommendation, the 2.75 and the level 3 versus the level 4 on the raise?
And the supplement.
The supplemental, and the money for the supplemental.
I think he
Which is about a little over $3 billion, just so you'll know, going from 59 to 70.
The 2.75 will be somewhere between 80 and 100 million dollars.
Right, about 80, yeah, probably 75, 80, $85 million in there. So you're talking, yeah, anywhere between 80 and 100 and something million dollars.
Just for clarity, because I needed that clarity, we're going to do Dr. Mills' motion first. If it fails, Mr. Claxton, and if that fails, we go back to the original. All right.
But I believe Dr. Brumley added the supplemental course to this. Is that correct? So that would, okay, so that would be included.
So that wouldn't be a difference between the original motion.
Correct.
So just to be clear, again, if Dr. Mills, when we take the vote, is approved, we're done?
Yes.
That's the entire thing?
With everything. That cleans up even Mr. Claxton.
She added his, she accepted his, so his was level 3.
So, this is just clarification. If both of those fail, then another amendment could be made to change a factor.
The original, Dr. Cross.
Yes. That's the order of the vote, nothing else.
And can we clarify now that it will be a roll call vote? I hate to be the first one. All right, guys. Does anyone need more clarification? Are you good? Need to repeat it?
Yeah. You ready?
Yeah. Yes, Ms. Allen.
Mr. Bourne?
Yes.
Mr. Bourne votes yes. Mr. Wilcox?
Yes.
Mr. Wilcox votes yes. Mr. Bromley?
No, I'm not going to jeopardize
You say
teacher pay
nay?
raises, no.
Mr. Bromley votes no. Mr. Castile? Mr. Castile is absent. Mr. Claxton?
Yes.
Mr. Claxton votes yes. Dr. Corville?
Yes.
Corville votes yes. Mr. Irwin?
No.
Mr. Irwin votes no. Representative Harris?
Abstain.
Abstain. Ms. Holloway, are you voting?
I mean, abstain.
Dr. Mills?
Yes.
Dr. Mills votes yes. Ms. Monica?
No.
Ms. Monica votes no. Ms. Polito?
No.
Ms. Polito votes no. Dr. Pope?
Yes.
Yes. Dr. Pope votes yes. Ms. Posey?
Yes.
Ms. Posey votes yes. Dr. Procopio?
No.
No. Did you say no?
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Procopio votes no. Ms. Romer?
No.
Ms. Romer votes no. Okay, everyone else is absent. Let's see, every kind of motion then. 7 yeas and 7 yes, 7 nays and 1 abstain. So yeah,
Motion failed.
No, it failed.
It fails. The
Pardon me?
motion fails.
Yes, it failed.
Thank you. So guide us back to where we're supposed to go, Ms. Davis.
Okay, so now we're voting on Mr. Claxton's motion, which is everything that was just said, except not requesting the additional raise of $1,000 in the supplemental letter for the supplemental staff. Everything except that.
Anyone, any questions? Everybody, it's good. Ms. Abby, roll call, please.
Okay. Mr. Bourne?
Yes.
Mr. Bourne votes yes. Mr. Buckhouse?
Yes.
Mr. Buckhouse votes yes. Mr. Brumley?
No.
Mr. Brumley votes no. Mr. Claxton?
Yes.
Mr. Claxton votes yes. Mr. Carville?
Yes.
Mr. Carville votes yes. Mr. Irwin?
No.
Mr. Irwin votes no. Representative Harris?
Abstain.
Representative Harris abstain. Ms. Holloway, voting?
Same.
Abstain?
Not voting.
No votes. Okay, Ms. Monica?
No.
Monica votes no. Ms. Mills? Dr. Mills, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Dr. Mills votes yes. Ms. Polito?
No.
No. Ms. Polito votes no. Dr. Pope?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yes. Dr. Pope votes yes. Ms. Posey?
Yes.
Ms. Posey votes yes. Dr. Pope, I'm sorry.
I got you.
Pope Leo?
No.
No. No. Ms. Romer?
No.
Ms. Romer votes no. You have 8 yes and 6 no. Motion
It's
passed.
7 yes, 6 no, and 2 abstentions, so the motion fails. The
Oh,
abstentions
you have-
essentially count as a no vote.
Oh.
Essentially, I mean, it's not on the record as no, but they're recorded as. So you have to have a majority of the.
So the motion fails.
Fails.
So abstain is a no? That's just not a vote.
To meet
right?
the minimum requirement of meeting the majority of the membership. It essentially is not a vote, so you don't have a majority if it's not in the yes category.
vote yes.
Correct.
That's the one. Great. Now we go. Now we're,
We're on the original motion with the change that has the supplemental.
1 second, committee members, Dr. Barling will
Yeah, I'm just gonna-
share with you.
I'm going to be friendly and add Mrs. Mills' support worker into the supplemental letter.
Which is $1,000. Dr. Mills,
Yes.
anyone else?
Second to that?
That's it.
Oh, you did,
Dr.
thank you.
Mills. Oh, sorry. Ms. Abby, roll call, please.
Okay. So just to clarify, the 275 is not in this motion. We're maintaining, we're adding the raises to the level 4 as opposed to the 3, and everything else is the same.
Ready? Mr. Bourne?
Yes.
Mr. Bourne votes yes. Mr. Brookhouse?
Yes.
Mr. Brookhouse votes yes. Mr. Bromley?
Yes.
Mr. Bromley votes yes. Mr. Claxton?
Yes.
Mr. Claxton votes yes. Dr. Corville?
Yes.
Dr. Corville votes yes. Mr. Irwin?
Yes.
Mr. Irwin votes yes. Ms. Gleason? I'm sorry, Representative Harris?
Abstain.
Abstain. Dr. Mills?
Yes.
Dr. Mills votes yes. Ms. Monica?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Ms. Monica votes yes. Ms. Polito?
Yes.
Ms. Polito votes yes. Dr. Pope?
Yes.
Dr. Pope votes yes. Ms. Posey?
Yes.
Ms. Posey votes yes. Dr. Popia? Sorry.
You should get an award for trying to pronounce my name. I mean, yes.
Ms. Romer?
Yes.
Ms. Romer votes yes. All yeas, no noes, one abstain. And you gonna vote?
I'm not voting.
Motion passes.
Motion passes.
If I could ask real quick, just as information, we don't follow up and just, I know I've seen information in media and other things in terms of where we are, the average, southern average, where we are now, and how much is looking at that. I think that'd be useful for everyone. I've seen other estimates, but I'd like help with this one.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, public comments? Somebody would love to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
Motion, Cindy, second. Thank you, everyone. You too, drive safe.